Is that a coffee or a beer? Well, that's in what I work in at my job, but well, now that I have to kind of set up this curriculum, I've kind of been breaking it down. Where do you work? I work at Trilogy. I kind of I do the front end, back end, help out with the bootcamp spot. And right now we're currently building a new bootcamp spot uh, because the company's scaling up to have multiple programs, not just coding programs. So we're kind of building a overall learning platform for the company. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Should we be strict and start at 7? All right. I think overall there were like 10 people who gave me their emails, so that's who I think might show up. But I think 5 is a good number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow. Okay, cool. All right, let me share my screen. Uh, so I'll just start with why I did this. So a few, maybe a month or two ago, I sent out a survey, just that Omar wanted me to be a moderator on the alumni channel, and I saw that a lot of the responses that I did get back from the feedback form, a lot of people said, "Hey, I need support, or I need a mentor, or I don't know what path to take in finding a career, or I'm having trouble." So I just wanted to help in any way that I could with whatever skills that I have, and hopefully uh, we we can help each other out, grow, and get really good at React and backend and just the whole stack. That way, we can help each other out, help each other grow in our careers. Because I think that's the main thing I want to take away from this. So hopefully, if throughout these few weeks, or if months, if we end up building a bigger project together, I think my biggest goal is if we can all get jobs together, in React. I'm currently working as a React full stack developer, but everyone who's on the call that needs the tools to get a career or get on the right path, that's my goal, to just help you guys out. So, uh, so what I did is I'm just going based off of what I've learned. Hey, this has helped me learn React. Let's start from step one. So the first thing, I'm going to share my screen. And if you guys have any questions, just let me know, or I'll stop or slow down, and that'll just be the pace of everything. Cool. You guys can see my screen? Brian, you good? You can see it? Or you can see yourself. All right, cool. Let me see. So, let's see this check. Let me check this out. So, kind of the way that I'm laying everything out is React is just basic JavaScript. We learned it for a few weeks inside of the coding bootcamp, but I don't think it really taught us the ins and outs of it. So the first week, what I kind of planned on doing was, for us, depending on how many of us there are, or we could either do this individually or as a group, is first I just created a basic website in HTML. And what React is so I created this thing, broke it down into other things I've learned, is here's like a framework for starting a React app from scratch. So the first thing we want to do is break the app into components, and kind of the idea behind breaking it into components is, well, these four kind of ideas. Map it out into a component structure of the app by examining the app's working UI and turning it into visual components that also map to React components. And those React components should just have a single purpose so that each just has one function, right? Another thing is think about components as you would functions or objects. A component should ideally only be responsible for one piece of functionality, and just separate the responsibility of each component. So right here, I know those things are kind of weird if you don't have some actual thing to look at, right? So components are, it depends on how far you want to break them down, but let's look at this little chart that I made. Um, so let's see. So to start off, this is, you can see my screen, right? Just want to make sure. Cool. All right. So just to start, this is kind of the basic website that I made. And I just made it using regular HTML. Let's see. Let me put this on. So let's see. If you see this, this is just regular HTML and CSS, right? Uh, Google fonts right here, style sheet, and this is just the regular basic HTML that's making up this whole layout. So what you have to do is break it down, break this whole layout into just simple components. And we tend to start off with the most parent component, which is just the app component. And that is going to hold pretty much the whole, orchestrate the whole layout, the whole pieces, right? So the next one we would have is a header component. And the header, let's see, let's break that down. Oh, okay. We have the navigation, right? Or this nav bar. So we would consider this nav bar another component. And nested inside of this component are also a few other things. We have this kind of logo component, and we have, let's see, we also have this UI link component, this UI right here, right? And inside of those UIs, so that yellow component is the parent of the following two nav links, right? And what we're doing is we're just breaking apart those just HTML things we created and breaking them down into smaller chunks. So I know that's kind of a lot for right now because I feel like I'm saying a lot. But do you guys have any questions so far? Or you can unmute. Okay, cool. Well, So so the basic so the basic idea is this might be overkill for just your basic, if this is all the website was and it just had two other pages, right? But it's kind of, I just made it so that we can all understand what just the regular like HTML page. So it might be overkill to call these two little things component in this sense. But as we go down the road, like there might be 5 different components and they might all do different things. So we just want to get the basic idea of hey, like right here, what what the concept of a parent having smaller components inside of it has, you know? So yeah, it it might be overkill to make the links their own individual component, but maybe there's down the road we might we're just applying this concept to other things. But I just created this because I thought it might make sense, you know? Yeah, if there was a search bar right here, that might be another nav link we have, you know? Like we might do another one right here if there was something else, right? So let me see, like let's do this one. So one of the ones that I looked at was Udemy, right? And I kind of broke down their website into what I might break down the components into. And we see right here, we have the nav bar as one large parent component. And inside of that, we have these smaller components. And it goes back to that concept of that each component should only do one thing. So you could just have one component that has, so we could just have the nav bar component, and inside of that have all the information for the React logo, have all the information for the UI links, you know? But as we're trying to scale up and say, okay, the nav bar, let's see, the nav bar is hard coded to have these things, right? Well, as you're trying to scale it, then you're going to have to go into this thing and then just add another one and add another one and add. But if we make it more dynamic, we can add those dynamically, right? So as we go further and further down, we break these bigger chunks into smaller little portions, right? So right here we have the banner. And now we're like, okay, the banner has, and again, this might be overkill depending on your situation, but it's just might be necessary further down the road, you know? So for example, just like that Udemy example, in these components, we have, this is a good example of when you would good use of components. So right here you have kind of like the video list right here that holds all the videos. So this would be like a video list component, and I'm talking about this purple outline right here. And inside of the video list there are multiple videos, right? But each little card, each one of these is going to be repeated over and over. It might have a different image, it might have a different title, an instructor, and a different rating and price, right? So we know those things are constantly going to change. So rather than create one over and over, we're going to create an individual component which we can reuse multiple times. So that component we're breaking down into a card that just has price and rating. I mean, we can dynamically change the title, but another component within that we might have to break down to be individual is this rating. And so as we go down further and further, we're saying, okay, that this little tutoring box is just another copy of this tutoring box. Okay, cool. Of this card. So we have three components of the similar kind, of the similar type. It's just a, it's just another box of this with a different title, a different paragraph, and a button, right? And we can, I'm going to go through the React components and kind of break it down for you guys so we can do it together hopefully. And the same thing for this footer right here. We have the footer right here in green. That's another component, and this is another component. So that's kind of feels like a lot. So what I'm gonna do is just start breaking this stuff down into actual React code. So, you guys have any questions? I feel like it's a lot, or I'm going through a lot without, maybe certain details are overlooked. Cool. Oh, Michael, cool. All right, thanks, man. All right, so we could go through the whole like Webpack creation and all that, but I feel like the best, the kind of way everyone's talking about just building something is just doing it by simply using create React app. And in the end, I mean later I'll give you guys this link to this Excel sheet, but you know, create React app right here. If you don't have it, it can just provide you, it's just install it for yourself, and it's just a quick way to get the React kind of set up and running really fast. And also is going to give you the link to this, as well as the link to the repo that I uploaded all the code that we're about to go over right now. So let's check that out. So I have installed create React app, so I'm just going to create React app. And I'm going to call it, you just give it a name, app 2. Cool. So while that runs, I'm going to open this folder, week 1. So I have this layout, right? And all I'm going to do is, I already have it open, but let's see. So the idea is that we're going to take this basic HTML that we've created, and we're just going to modularize it into the concepts of those components, right? We're just going to take this code and put it into React components. So once you install create React app on your machine, then you just have to run create React app, and then right here just the name you want to give that folder. So right here, if we see, we have app to components. So I think that folder already gave us all the dependencies, but I'm just going to run it just in case. So let's see. So once that folder is available, let's see, cool. So once that folder is available, I'm going to pretty much Create React App gives you all these kind of presets, right? And they give you the best presets of in terms of bundling and speed and efficiency. They make it so you just have to focus on writing code. So pretty much all I do when I start is I just get rid of all the stuff that I'm not going to use, which is these, right? And I just delete those. Let's see. Then I go into app.js. Let's see. And I delete these unnecessary ones, like, let me see, like logos in there. We got rid of those just so it doesn't send any errors. Okay, we got rid of that, and we need app to run. Cool. Then what I'm going to do, let's see, is I'm going to go into that source folder. Then I'm just going to create a folder called static, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. And let me see what I did over here. I set one up already, but I just want to make sure that I do it correctly. Cool. So what I'm gonna do, static. Okay, cool. So when starting off a React app and Create React App, it gives you index.js is going to be the first file. When you run React, which you do npm start, right? You go to the package.json, you run npm start, and once that starts, it's going to run these scripts, and it's going to automatically look in this folder and run this index.js file. And the first inside of the index.js file, it's going to render this app, and app is whatever is inside of here. So just let's see. Cool, so let's just start the app, right? So package.json says npm start is how we start the project to make sure it's up and running. Let's see. Cool. Let's see. It should say hello. Oh, I didn't save it. Cool. So, good. Hello. All right. So, what I'm just going to do is I'm going to import. We're going to create something right now. I'm just going to import because that's the way we import other files into that app.js file, and I'm just going to call it static component from, and we created the static folder right now, so we're just going to go from this file, and we're going to go into the static folder, and inside of the static folder I'll just create a file called static, right? And you don't need to write .js because the bundler will already know that, and it's throwing an error because we haven't created a file in there called static yet. So let's just create that file. Let's see. Touch static.jsx. Cool. So I created the static.jsx file, and in order for So the language that kind of React uses is called JSX, and that's just a way. It looks exactly like HTML, but that's just a unique language that was created to help us understand the HTML that's being written. So it's just another way of writing HTML. So right here, we need to import React from React. And that's just so that the following code, when we write it, it's being understood by the compiler so that it translates what we're about to write into something that makes sense for the browser to read, right? So, oh, excuse me, you wanted to say something? Oh, cool. Maybe, uh-huh. Okay, cool. So what what I do is for this purpose, I'm not really going to get too far into what is it, classes and state and all that. So I'm just going to write what's called a functional component, right? So the way you do that, const, and we're just going to call it static, right? And this is just, we're about to define a component. Uh, so, uh-huh. Oh, you could have it a JS file, but it's just that inside of my editor, inside of Atom, I probably have to set something up. But right here, if I don't set it up, I have to automatically look for JSX just so it auto completes for me. Yeah. So inside of static, it's just a component. So, I mean, you can consider this a function. It is a function, stateless function. So inside of when we have certain kinds of functions, we want it to return a value, right? So I'm going to hit return, and I'm going to do parentheses. And the reason I want to do parentheses is because a component can only return one thing at a time. So that means, let's see, div, right? This is a div, and if we do this, React won't be able to interpret this because it sees too many things at once, and it can only interpret one thing being output. So the way we have to do anything, if we have multiple things within a file, we first have a div or some kind of parent element. So it could be anything we want. It could be a form, or it could just be, let's see, it could be a span, right? Or it could be H H2 tag. But the concept is that when we return something, it should only have one parent element. So I'm just going to break down this file step by step, and just so hopefully this might help you guys out. So just say I already created my basic static folder, right? From there, let me just get so the basic idea is hopefully you guys just create a nice layout of any kind. It could just be just a regular landing page. So what I'm going to do is just take everything inside of this body tag of the normal HTML page I created, right? This one. And we're going to just render it as one huge component. So I took this code. I'm about to just take everything that's within the body. So I'm just going to take all of this and this footer right here. Cool. Now I'm going to take that and put it between this parent div, right? So all I'm going to do, oh, I got to make sure that I export this. So what you want to do is, okay, you created this stateless function that's going to return all of this code, right? And all of that code, you have to make sure it gets exported so that way you can import it into another file. So we do export default and then the name of the function or item you want to export. So the name of this component is static. So we do export static, just save that file. And now since we exported this file, let's see. Am I still sharing my screen? Okay, cool. Just okay, now since I exported this file, did I write it correctly? What is it? Oh, cool. Export default. Cool. You write export default static. So now since I've already exported this file, now I can go into my app.js file. We have static component, which we imported from right here. We went into the static folder, then we're just taking this file called static, right? But I just saw that I misspelled it. So static. Okay, cool. You were waiting for the fail. Oh, that's pretty funny. Okay, cool. So right here, I'm going to save it, right? So what I'm pretty much doing is we created this function, right? And inside of this function, we're returning pretty much one thing. And that one thing is this div with all this information in it, right? So we're creating the function, we're returning this div, and we're also exporting this function, right? And export default static. Now, because we exported the static file, we can now import it inside of the app.js file, which is right here. And we can name it whatever. We can name it eggs, right? And then this would have to become eggs. And now we'll now export everything we wrote inside of the static.js file, right? So, So now that we have this, the way you write a component is just by writing the angle brackets, the name of the component, and just the / and angle brackets again. And if we save it, let's see this thing. Oh, that's pretty cool. It saved it already. Cool. So that's the just basic HTML that we have for our components, right? So another thing that I'm going to need to do is inside of the source file, I'm going to go into that one and I'm going to create a CSS file. And there's different ways to structure your app. I'm just going to create it this way for right now. Let's see. So I'm going to cd into the CSS folder and I'm going to create two files, which is base.css and flexbox.css. And I'm just creating these files because I made this the layout in Flexbox. So I'm just going to go into my basic layouts. So just imagine like a graphic designer, a front-end guy just gave you these files and you want to, they already laid it out for you. So I'm just going to copy those things and then I'm going to go into right here into this flexbox file, and I'm just going to paste it, right? They're just basic HTML, CSS files. So I'm just copying them over from the layout that I had, copy pasting them. Cool. So let's just double check. So I have this base CSS that I created and this flexbox CSS that I'm just gonna import over from the layout that I had. And what we do is that now inside of here, along with these files, I'm going to also import them. And the way you just import these kinds of files is import, and you don't have to give them a name. You can just right here / and we're going from the index file, and we want to go to the CSS file. So we just go we go to that folder. Then inside of there we do base.css and create that, and I'll do flexbox, just because that's what I named those CSS files. So hopefully, yep, nice, cool. So all we're doing is that I imported so far, right? I imported I imported the HTML that I had over on my basic HTML layout, and then I created the CSS folders. I imported all the CSS that I had originally. And now what I'm going to do is kind of start breaking this basic HTML into React components, right? So let's just start. So in our, any questions off of that? You guys are good? Cool. All right. So this is just like stateless. Let me see. This is not. Oh, cool. This is just a basic stateless function. So what we could do is right here we're exporting static, right? So what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to break this down piece by piece of what each component should look like. And if we did this, when you're creating a React app, it starts by first like visualize what you want the site to look like. And in my case, I just built it out like that first, regular HTML. And then just map out the components and the structure of the components by what makes sense to you. And what makes sense to you kind of starts getting more solidified the more that you do just gain your understanding of what a React component is. How far should I break it down? Did I break it too far down that it doesn't make any sense anymore? So if we go back to that file that I had, what I decided based on how I saw it is that I had, let's see, I had a parent component, right? And that's this red outline. Then I also saw this header have this kind of logo component along with an unordered list that has two links, right? So I broke those down into a header component that has child components, which is this React Bootcamp logo along with these two links inside of a unordered list. Cool, so I'm going to have those components to take care of. Then I'm also going to have this banner right here, and inside of those I'm going to have two more components, which is this headline and this kind of tagline. And the reason I'm breaking it down, just because it might not make sense of, hey, why am I going to break this down if this is just a static little piece that it's just a one-time thing, right? And as we go, as we break it down more and more, you'll see how just having this banner, right? I might actually in the future, I might want to keep this whole presentation of how this component looks. I want this kind of background, I want this font, this color, and I want there to be a little tagline underneath, right? But I might want the content to change. So we might, since this is already a component, we don't need to create another component. We could just dynamically change the information that goes into each one. So we can have 20 pages that are using this banner component that have different titles and different little taglines down there. So that's why, based on my understanding of, oh, I want to break it down like this, that was my thinking behind that. That in the future, I might want to use this little banner, but just change the information. So that's why I did that. Then I have this row that I created, right? And inside this row, card list, I called it, I have 3 cards, right? And I'm gonna break those into their individual components. And the reason I didn't break it down into more like, okay, a tutoring component or a paragraph component or a button component is that this is just what I wanted a card to look like, and all that I wanted to change was maybe the tutoring, the title, the paragraph content, and whatever the button says. But I'm not gonna, that to me is overkill if I made this paragraph, because paragraph, you could just insert that manually. You don't want that to be a component, you know? Another thing is that I made the footer. This footer, I might want it to have the same color and the same information, but I might want to put dynamic information like a Twitter info or contact details in there. Cool. So now that I broke all that stuff down, we have all these components, and let's see how many there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Cool, like 12, 13 components. So what I'm going to start to do now is, and that's why right here, let's see, visual components often map tightly to their respective React components, right? So that's kind of pretty cool of how if you look at the HTML, it kind of leads you into, hey, what constitutes a new component, or it just clearly maps to that. So what I'm going to do is we have this stateless component, right? So I'm going to just start, I'll start by doing this header. And I'm going to go piece by piece, just so you guys get it, or you guys understand. So let me just, I took that header out, right? Let's just, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to comment it out for right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create something. So const, that's just how you define the variable, right? Just in case, instead of var, you just do const. Const, then I'm going to call that header, and then I'm going to define it like that with arrow function. Cool. So all these, when you're defining these functions, they all need to return something, right? Every one of these components needs to return a value. It could be false, it could be null, it could just be a little parent, I mean a div that says hi. It just needs to return something, right? So if you see right here, And since we're doing it in the same file, we're allowed to do this. Just like functions, right? We can call them within other functions, right? So if we see right here in this header component, or in this header function, we're returning something that has a header, and that's a parent, that also has an h1 tag and a ul tag, which with two other links, right? So what we need to do is we already defined the header, so now all we need to do is right here we can replace all this code with just saying header, right? And if we save the file, let's go right here. Cool, right? But let's see what happens if we delete the file and save it. Cool, it deleted that header component, right? So all that information we have right here is just all that header information, which is all of this, is now contained within this little piece of code. So I'm just going to keep doing it, breaking it down further and further. This is a banner, and if we looked at, right, let's see, let me just step by step. Okay, we have this banner with two child components. So I'm just going to take this out, and I'm going to create another component, and I'm going to call it banner. Let's see. And again, all I do is return, and in here, and now I have this banner component. So now I just replace all this code with that. And this is what we consider JSX, just the way it's written. It's HTML. It looks exactly like HTML. It's just how it's being interpreted, right? By the functions the methods that React gives us. So the methods in React just have certain functions that can interpret this and turn this into HTML that the browser can read. And that's why this is the reason we have to import React. Because if we do not import React, let's just comment that out, it'll throw an error, right? React must be in scope when using JSX. So it knows that. Let's see what happens if I delete these. Yeah, those are the same thing. So this is necessary if you're writing JSX or writing React code, right? So, we have this component, this parent component, and inside of that it has 3 cards, right? And all we need to do is take that and create another component. Let's see, I'm just going to call it card list equals return, break it open, and put that in there. And just in case, we're just making these parentheses just so, let's see, if you don't have them, it tends to throw an error. Let's see. Does it throw an error? No. It's just easier for it to for you to just visually see, okay, let me just break this open and put a parent component inside of this, right? So we take this card list, and all we already see that the card list is missing, right, within the HTML. So let's see, card list, let's see, cool. And then the same thing for the footer, right? So const, just say footer, and you have to return something in order to be interpreted. So just take that code, and cool. Does anyone have any questions on anything? Or why I'm breaking certain components down, or yeah. Are you talking about this one? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So pretty much right now we're just creating it all within the same file, but once we actually modularize it and take it out of this one file, we would do the same thing that we're doing inside of this app. We're going to import, we'll just say import header from and then the route to that header file. And then right here we would put header, right? But since it's all in that one file, we can do that for right now. We're just exporting static, and then we're calling these kind of functions. So we're calling this function header, and we're just getting back whatever is returned. But we can do that since it's all just wrapped in this one div. Cool? Does that make sense? Cool. So we're good? All right. Cool. So just I want to get down to the point where we break this down even more. That way we kind of get to the point of props. So let me just go over, I don't think we talked about this part. So after we kind of visually break down the app into components of what makes sense to us, then comes the second part, which is making the static version. And that's why I built the static portion of the app first. I just took the HTML that I had. Let's see. Yeah, I just took all the HTML that I had and I put it inside of one just component like that. So it says lay the framework for the app, get a clear idea how the component tree is organized, meaning you know who the parent is and who the child is, right? You know what's nested inside of what. And for the child components, what they tend to do is that they just render the HTML portion of the application. The children are more concerned with the actual HTML, and the parents are concerned with just orchestrating everything. Meaning, when we get further down the line of learning state and all that, they take care of props and state and any other really crazy idea. But the children just take care of the HTML rendering. So let's check that out. So since I just talked about why it makes sense to just create a static and then we're breaking it down. So inside of this, inside of this header component, right? I'm going to break it down even more. So I'll just start by I'll just call this, let's see, const. I'll just call it header logo, right? And that might be because we might want to dynamically change it, uh, and just have the parent take care of the displaying the components, and actual components actually displaying the HTML portion. So this one's pretty easy. So we're going to take that out. We're going to return it in here. And we're going to put header logo, right? Then we write that component. Cool. And just to clean it up visually, I just like having things look clean like that to me. So after that, I do this unordered list, right? And I'm just going to call it navigation. Navigation right here. Cool. And I'm just going to duplicate that, call this navigation. Navigation. Cool. And inside of that, we only want it to return one thing, right? So we have the parent, which is the unordered list, and inside of that, it has multiple LIs. So navigation. So we have the header logo function, which is returning this component, and this navigation returning this, right? So save it. We're still good to go. Just always make sure you're displaying the components correctly. Cool. So we also, when we're looking at our components, let's see. We broke this down into 2 links, right? So I'm just going to do that right here. And we're going to go further down. We'll break it down even more, right? So, but right now, we're just going to break each component into its own individual one, but I'll show you what I mean in a little. Return. And we just do an li, right? So that's nav1. I'm just going to duplicate that, cut that, call this nav2. And just, that one said my account. Cool. My account. So now within that UL, I'm going to do nav1, duplicate that, call that nav2. Cool. So inside of this parent component, we are now displaying 2 children, which is nav1 right here and nav2. I'm just going to clean that so it can make sense. Cool. So right here is kind of, if you see, we have this, let's see. This is our whole application. It's just 4 components, right? But inside of those 4 components, we have kind of subtleties, right? So we have, it's easier if I want to use this component somewhere else, I can just, or if I want to actually use it multiple times, right? This card list, I could say, this is not how we do it, but just say, I want 4, let me just say, just pretend that there was a card list, I'll say it, video card list, right? And then we want a members card list, right? And we want a, I don't know, another card list, right? Just imagine that they were different card lists with different information in each, right? And that's why we can easily create these components. And right here, you see that automatically I didn't have to, and imagine that this was just card list, video card list, members card list, and it had different data within each card list. But that's the concept of just making a component, is just so you can easily fill it with dynamic data, right? So once I do that, I broke down these nav1s, nav2. Cool. Now I'm going to break down and I'll call it const headline equals that return. And then I'll just create another one just so I can call it tagline. And inside of those, all I'm doing is I'm breaking this down even further. And the reason I'm doing that is because it made sense to me based on my experience of, hey, this is how I wanted the components to be broken down, because I wanted to use, I imagined using the components in the future in a certain way, right? So I got the headline component, then I'm going to have a tagline component, which all I did was break this information down. So this headline, just imagine it's the same thing as replacing this headline with this, right? That's all we're doing. The same thing with this tagline. And all we do, again, just const, I'll say, I'll just say card 1. Card 1. And we're returning something. Just the same basic structure of everything. So I'll just duplicate these ones. Card 1, 2, and 3. And all I have to do is take this right here, take that, cut it out, put it in there. Take that, and I'll show you how to break this down even more. But right now we're just doing it if I had to do it like this, just the hard way. And we're going to learn how to simplify this code even more in a little bit. So, card 1, card 2, card 3. Cool. Make sure it's displaying. Cool. And then I don't know. Let's just break this down. It didn't make sense to me right now. Nah, I'm not gonna break it down. Right now it just doesn't make sense to me to break it down. Maybe when we modularize it to be a footer that has more information, I'll do that. But right now I'll just keep it like that. So again, we have a parent, and this is kind of holding all of the elements that comprise that landing page, right? This whole thing. This is holding 1 component, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And those are all the parts that make that layout. And all we're doing is modularizing it even more. So that header has 2 components inside of it. Header logo and navigation. Header logo looks like this. Navigation inside has a parent and has 2 children, nav1, nav2, right? Another thing that we have is a banner. And banner has a parent, and inside it has 2 children, headline, tagline, right? And we also have a card list, which is a parent of row and just has 3 different cards, right? So is there any question on why certain things were broken down, or parents, or nesting of anything? All right, cool. Right now it's kind of be the last steps of, okay, how do we make this dynamic, right? So right here, the last parts of this piece of the puzzle is, and kind of this is going to be it for right now, and then maybe next week we'll go over starting to add state, maybe with a different example, because this doesn't really allow itself to be good state example. But It says bottom level components, also known as leaf components, hold the majority of the page's HTML. This is generally the case. The components above leaf components are primarily concerned with orchestration, right? So all it's doing is telling us, hey, who goes where, when, right? Hey, it should be header first, banner, card list, footer. Okay, cool. So it's not displaying the actual HTML. What's displaying the actual HTML is these children, right? So header go first, then banner, then card list, and footer, right? So for header, what it is saying, header is the parent component of these components, right? Of these children components. So header's in charge of orchestrating, hey, the header should have header logo and navigation. And within each one, it kind of modularizes more and more, right? But right here, we see that kind of header logo is the most child component along with these nav links. So these ones are the actual ones that are rendering the HTML, right? The parent is just concerned with saying, hey, who goes where, when, right? We want 2 of these, then we want 1 of these, then maybe we want another one over here. I mean, let's see, right? So let's just save that, and yeah, my course account, and of course it's going to be different data, but just this navigation component is just worried about orchestrating who goes where, when, right? And the children just hold the HTML. It's JSX right now, but pretty much they take care of rendering the HTML. The parent just takes care of who's allowed to render the HTML, or and when, or in what order. So now, oh damn. Let me see. This one. Is that one? Cool. I think he has a dog. All right. Cool. So we have these functions, right? And you guys are familiar with the arguments that are sent to functions, right? So function. Oh, okay. I thought I muted the dogs. Thanks, man. Oh, you can hear me now, right? Yeah, okay. I saw Brian's mouth move. All right. Cool. So with the functions, right, we have it's not cool. With the functions, we write arguments, right? One, or just, right? And then we pass those to the whatever we want to manipulate down here, right? So const, right? Or we could just do this. Return plus, let's just do this, A plus B, right? So we just return A plus B, right? And it'll just, if these are 2 numbers, if this is a 1 and this is a 2, it'll return back 3, right? But the idea is that information is being passed into the function, right? And so what happens is that information is being passed in from the parent component of this child, of any child, right? So what you need to do is props, right? And props is just an argument being passed to this component from its parent. And the parent of header logo is header, right? So what we need to do is pass information into header logo, right? And what we can do is we can pass in a property, and we could call it title, right? And title, the way you pass in properties inside of React is just, you can pass different data types, but you have to give it a property name, equals, and then an object, right? And inside of that object, you can put different values, right? In this case, I'm going to put React Bootcamp, just because that's the name, that's the title that I want to pass down to this header logo. Because if you see, let's just go back. If you see right here in this header logo, it's just that component. But the way, this is just for like aesthetics and readability. I just broke it open, and I'm going to write a property in there. This would be the same thing as just your HTML when you write class, right? Equals, and then you write the class name, right? And then you put another class name, right? So that's the idea behind properties. Or we can do when we do the href, right? And we pass the href, and then, so it's pretty much, it's just like HTML. We're passing in values into the component like that. So this is the way we're going to do it in JSX. So just for readability, I just break it out like that, and just I'm going to create a property called title, and I'm going to pass. You have to put it inside of an object. You can actually do that for strings, but just for consistency, I just put everything inside of curly braces. So right here, what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to put it inside curly braces. And the reason we're putting it inside curly braces is that we're going to put some JavaScript in here, right? And just the values are just going to be whatever is being passed in to us from the parent component, right? And the parent component is header. So header is telling us, hey, inside of header logo, I'm giving you a property called title, and this is the value of title. So what I'm going to do is props.title, and if we go like right here, renders the same thing, but right here we have this value. It's the same thing that we did, if you guys remember handlebars, where we just did curly braces and just passed in information, right? We could do the same thing for this href. I want this to be a certain value, so I'm going to say props.href. And the reason I'm saying href is because I'm going to pass it a value called href. I'm going to give it a property called href. And for right now, I can give it a whole website or a link, but I'm just going to put hashtag. So let's see, right? We're good. But let me just show you what that is. Let me just console log. Since this is a function, it'll console log it. So I'm going to say parent, I'm just going to call it parent properties. And then I'm going to console log props, right? Because these are the values that are being passed. Header logo is being passed props. And the props are these two things, right? So I'm going to console log that, and if I see on our window, on our developers console, let's see, on the console, right? We have two properties, href and title. Let's see, index, where is that? I'm not sure where it is, but we'll fix that. So if you see, let me give it another property called new property, right? Equals, and I'm just gonna say no. It's going to give us an object with new property, right? Or new proper, and it's null. So it gives you the property name along with the value of the property. In our case, we did React Bootcamp for title, and href is just a hashtag, and we gave null to new property. So that's how you pass arguments into functions like that, right? Or they're being passed into it by the parent, right? So that's why we can just keep this dynamic. We want to make sure that our code is dynamic, so we could just put props.href, and we only know what the property type is or what the property name is based on if we can console log it, right, to find out what properties are in the future, because the children, the property names kind of tend to get dense, so we might not be familiar with them, so we could just console log that. So let me just keep doing that to more and more components, right? Navigation doesn't need that because we're going to put some information in here. So right here, I'm just going to break it open and put something that says title, right? Title equals, and the same thing, nav2 gets it, and I'm just going to copy this, nav2 title, and I'm going to just take this, rip it out right here, make it my courses. Take this out, make it account, right? Because it's going to be past props.title. This property name is being passed in from nav1. Nav1 is being passed in a property called title, and we need to make sure that props is being passed. Props, let's see, props, and inside props.title. And again, just like in regular functions, this name doesn't really matter. We can call it data, but we would have to also call this data, right? So again, we can do this for the hrefs, but I'll leave that to you guys. Let's just do this just so you see multiple things. And I'll just copy the same thing from here because it's going to be the same thing. So href, cool. And I'll call this. We do it curly braces, right? Because it's going to read a JavaScript, and .href. It's going to return an actual value. So href, we want to do that because this is going to be dynamic information, and this is going to change all the time. So this information, if it's a Google link or an internal link, it's always going to change. So we just want the children to always render data dynamically. So let me see, props, called it props, cool. And this one, headline. Headline has a parent called banner. So headline, we want to pass it another thing called title. Let's see, title equals, and then we just do that. And does tagline, okay, tagline, again, you can call these properties whatever you want. It's just that I'm calling them that based on what I think is a good name. So let's see. So for this one, you'll first have to put the argument name that you're going to give it. You're going to call props dot, in our case, title, because that's what we called it right here, title. I think, yeah, we have to give it a value. So we're giving headline a value, we're passing it information called title. Title goes to props. Props now goes inside of here. Tagline, we're giving tagline a property called title. Inside of title, there's this information. So we go right here, props, inside of tagline, then we call props dot, and then the name of the property we want to display, right? So, cool. All right, doing good. the same thing for all these things, right? And then once we do this, I'll show you guys how we can replace all these three components with just one component, right? So all these components have the similar thing. So I'm going to say right here, I'm going to give it a property called title right here, empty string because I'm going to fill it with information right now. Another thing that I want to take care of is this, and I'll call it content. Content equals, and another thing that it has, I want to call it, I'll say button name. Button name. Just because we might want it to say learn more or click here or more information, whatever. That's going to be dynamic data as well, right? So since all these cards are the same, I'm going to just give them all the same property names, right? And I'm going to just take that stuff out. Tutoring. I'm going to take this out. Give it that. Button name. All of these buttons for right now are going to have all that. So I'm going to give them all the Learn More class. And for Learn More, since they're all going to be the same thing, I'm just going to be curly braces, and we know, so button name. Since we all know it's going to take in the title, the property name of button name, right, in the future. So we do props, we do props.title. Cool, we got that. We replace this, we call it props.content, and that's because we called content, right? We gave it those values. So that's all we have to do right here. Tutorials, cut that out. I'll call it props, give it to props right here. Props, tutorials, cool. And I'll call it props.title. Got to make sure we give it information up here. Call this props.content. Props.content. Yeah. So that's what I want to show get to, and just so you could see that this is like a lot of components, right? So right here, one more, and then we'll do what Brian just talked about. Props. Did I take that info? Cool. Props dot. I think that's title. Cool. Take this info, put it in here. Cool. Take this info, call that props.content. All right. Cool. Yeah, and that's what I also wanted to say, that what Brian just said. If you see all of these things, they all repeat themselves over and over. It has the exact same thing. Props title, props content, props button name, right? So what we could do is we could just erase these redundancies right here and just call this card, right? Because it's that name is repeated over and over. So we could just change card 1, it is now a card, card 2, also a card, card 3, also a card, because they all have the same information, the same property names. All we need now is just this card component, and we just replaced, instead of creating 3 different components, we created one component with dynamic data. And we can make it even more dynamic. This is static. We don't want that in the future, you know. But the same thing, we can also do the same thing with, let's see, these navs, right? We could call this nav link, right? So we can erase this because it also has a href and a prop, and the HTML looks exactly the same. So we erase this, and we change nav2 to navlink because it is now a navlink component, right? And header logo, do we have any other redundancies? No. Let's see. So if you see that, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are the parents, right? And these are pretty much all of the components that we need to render this HTML page. It's overkill for this particular little layout, but you'll see it's just more important to get the concepts of, hey, how do I break things out, and what is a component? And a component is pretty much like that you want to just be able to reuse something over and over. You know, you can just call a certain property name and it'll render a button with a certain color, you know, or a header with a certain kind of drop down. So are there any questions on that? That was pretty much all I thought about covering today of, you know, just, hey, let's look at the website and how do we break it down, right? How do we turn what's actually visible in the HTML and just turn those things into components? And again, if you see this thing, a component should just have one responsibility, right? It should just have one function. And if you see this, the function of this static component is just to render these components. The function of this header is just to render these two, header logo and navigation. You know, all header logo does is render the logo name. All navigation does is render the nav links. That's all it does. You know, so this static component shouldn't render the header plus render, plus also display this color and all that stuff. That's too much information. So every component should just do one thing, you know. So after you break something down and just make it responsible for one concept, then after that you kind of make a static version, and you kind of, it says right here, lay the framework for the app, getting a clear idea of the component tree and how it's organized. So we can clearly see that the tree, who's the parent, who's the child, right? So this parent has these children, right? These children are the parent for these children, right? So now that it's static and we can clearly break it out, we see what's in charge of what, right? We don't have to dance between all these files that we exported and imported. We can just clearly see it all on one thing. Bottom level component to render HTML based on static props passed down from parents, right? And that's what we're doing right here. These child components are rendering the HTML, right? This is the HTML from the parents. And we know that the HTML can change, or the content in the HTML can change by the property, the value of the properties that we're passing to the children, right? And let's see. Okay, so bottom level components hold the majority of the page's HTML. Okay, cool. And then pass down static props. And that's what we did. We passed down static props from the parent to the child, right? So let's see. I don't know if you guys had, that seems like a ton, you know, but I'm gonna give you guys this link to the code and also the Create React App link and the code to the GitHub, and hopefully you guys can walk through it. Let's see this thing. Let me do this one last thing. Inside of the code that I have on GitHub, I created the static one, right? And inside of this static folder, file, I just laid out the basic HTML. Then I did static component 1, and you can walk through, okay, he broke it down from this static component that has all the HTML into now this smaller component, right? And then you can see static component 2. Okay, how did he break it down even more? The same thing with 3. And each is just me breaking it down more and more. So hopefully that made sense for you, and I just how I modularize it more and more, and it's better for you guys to understand. Cool. So if you guys have any questions or
Mario, I got a question actually.
cool.
When you're going through your code and I was thinking about a class, right? Shouldn't that be class name because the class name reserved? Or I mean, it'll still display and render, I think, but it'll give you an error in your console, right?
Yeah, where did I have that? Just because, is that in the code that I just did? Because, yeah, I read the console, right? I saw it in the console, but I didn't know where it was in the code. Let me just see. Let me see. I just want to see where I put class. Where did I put class? Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. I didn't see it. Yeah. Yeah, so I messed that up. So that's pretty good to know. Thanks, Thomas. Because in React, what it does is that class is reserved, and that's because, later when we get into this, we're going to learn about how JavaScript, we're now able to use class as a keyword to create components that have methods and different properties in them. So you're not allowed to have class. The JSX transforms class name into class. That way the browser can read it. But you have to get rid of all these classes. Let's see this thing. I'll just take all of that and just, okay, cool. And then you just have to rename it class name and it'll be good. That's why I was getting those errors. Pretty cool. All right. Did you guys have any questions? I'll send you guys the link on the channel for whatever, Slack. Yeah, next Saturday, what I was thinking was state might be something all its own or some, because I don't know how hard that might be to comprehend. State, then state, then inverse data flow, then after that the server stuff, and then pretty much after that, then, well, if it's just us doing it, then I was thinking about building a actual project together, something we can all contribute to and just have a whole a full stack app, like a bigger project 3. If it's 10 people, if it's 20 people, then a pretty intense project we can all work on. Yeah, but the only reason I can do Saturdays, I'm in South Africa. So right now it's, what time is it? 8:30 p.m. So yeah. So that's why it's early. Because if I do it at a good time, like not so crazy morning, it'd be like 3 in the morning over here. You are? Yeah, man. All right, guys. Cool. Thanks, guys. I'll send you the Slack link right now. Cool. Later, guys. Cool.